All right, everybody, let's dive into Vikings.
Vikings.
Probably learned about Columbus discovering America in school.
Right.
Well, get this.
Yeah.
Vikings were here like 500 years before him.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. Right. So we're going to unpack all of this
Okay.
using historian Martin Whitick's book, American Vikings, as a starting point.
Sounds good.
But before we get into their transatlantic voyages, let's talk about who the Vikings actually were.
Okay.
Because, we've all got that image in our heads.
Yeah, the horned helmets. That's not totally accurate.
Right.
So Vikings were actually a diverse group of Scandinavians.
Yeah?
And they were active from the 8th to 11th centuries.
Okay.
And while they were known for raiding,
Right.
they were also really skilled traders and even settlers.
Huh. So it's more than just pillaging and plundering.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, and their reach extended far beyond Europe too, right? I mean, they went as far as Baghdad.
That's right.
On camels even.
On camels, no less.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
And they even had a big influence on the histories of Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So they really got around.
They did.
Okay, so it wasn't just about brute force though, right?
Mm-hmm.
What drove this expansion?
So there were a lot of factors, actually,
Right.
like population growth back home in Scandinavia,
Okay.
also the rise of early kingdoms
Mm.
who had the resources to fund these expeditions.
Okay.
And then there were even disruptions in trade with the Islamic Caliphate.
Ah, so they had to look for new markets.
Exactly.
Wow. So it sounds almost like a perfect storm brewing in Scandinavia.
Yeah, you could say that.
Things are getting crowded. Resources are scarce.
Mhm.
New lands would be pretty tempting, I would think.
Definitely, population pressure was definitely a factor.
Okay.
But at the same time, those early Scandinavian kingdoms needed new sources of wealth and power.
Right.
So when existing trade routes were disrupted,
Yeah.
leaders were probably looking for alternatives.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about how they got around. We all picture those iconic long ships with the dragon heads,
Right.
but were those the only ships they used?
Well, first, we got to talk about those horn helmets.
Oh, yeah.
There's no evidence Vikings wore helmets with horns.
Really?
Yeah, it's a myth.
Wow. Okay, well, that's interesting.
As for the ships, long ships were great for raiding,
Okay.
but not ideal for crossing the Atlantic.
Right.
For longer voyages, they used sturdier, larger vessels, more like merchant ships, really.
Interesting. Okay, so how did they manage to sail all the way to North America then?
Right.
I mean, that's a long way,
Yeah, it's a pretty epic journey.
even with a sturdy ship.
It was.
So how did they do it?
Think of it like stepping stones.
Okay.
From Scandinavia, they went to Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
then to Iceland,
Okay.
and then finally Greenland,
Gotcha.
and each step brought them closer to North America.
Makes sense.
And what's really cool is we can trace this migration through DNA.
Oh, wow.
Icelandic DNA shows a good amount of Irish ancestry,
Oh, really?
which suggests there were some early Viking raids and interactions.
Huh. So maybe even some romance amidst the raids.
Maybe.
That's really interesting. Okay, but how did they actually, know where they were going on these voyages?
Right.
I mean, was it just luck?
Not at all. Vikings were amazing navigators.
Okay.
They used a combination of traditional knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
careful observation of natural phenomena,
Oh, okay.
and some surprisingly advanced tools.
Like what?
They used sunstones, for example.
Sunstones.
Yeah.
What are
They're these special crystals
Okay.
that can help determine the position of the sun,
Really?
even on cloudy days.
Wait, so they could navigate by the sun even when it was cloudy?
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
How does that even work?
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Sunstones are made of a type of feldspar
Okay.
that polarizes light.
Okay.
And so by holding up the stone and rotating it,
Mm-hmm.
Vikings could find the point where the light passing through it was brightest, and that would indicate the direction of the sun,
Wow.
even if it was hidden behind the clouds.
So they basically had a backup GPS.
You could say that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a testament to their ingenuity and skill.
Okay, so they were skilled navigators.
Yes.
They had sturdy ships.
Mhm.
They were driven by this need for resources and new opportunities.
Right.
But what about the stories we hear about Vinland?
Oh, yeah.
A land filled with timber firs, even wild grapes.
Right.
Where do those fit into all of this?
So those stories come from the Icelandic sagas,
Sagas.
which are these historical literary tales,
Okay,
a blend of fact and fiction.
gotcha.
They were written centuries after the events they describe.
Right, so we have to take them with a grain of salt.
Exactly.
Right.
But they do have some intriguing details
Okay.
that seem to line up with what we know about North America.
So it's like their version of historical records?
Yeah.
Even if they're a little embellished. Do they actually mention like specific Vikings who made it to North America?
They do. They mention Leif Erikson.
Leif Erikson. I
Yeah.
feel like I've heard that name.
Son of Eric the Red.
Okay.
He's often credited as the first European to set foot on continental North America.
Wow. Okay, so Leif Erikson. But do we have any concrete evidence that he or other Vikings actually made it to North America?
Yeah.
Besides those sagas, which, sound a little like tall tale.
I know, right? But, well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
We actually have physical evidence of a Viking settlement in North America
What?
at a place called Lanso Meadows in Newfoundland.
Hold on. Are you saying there are Viking ruins in Canada?
That's right.
That's unbelievable.
It's true. The site was discovered back in the 1960s, and it's been confirmed as a genuine Viking settlement dating back to around 1021 AD.
Wow.
They found building foundations, remnants of ironworking, and even artifacts that are clearly Norse.
So they weren't just passing through.
No.
They actually built a settlement.
They did.
That completely changes how I think about early American history.
It's a game changer for sure.
Yeah, it really is. And it raises even more questions.
Like what?
Well, if they established a base camp at Lanso Meadows,
Right.
how far south did they explore?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of interactions did they have with the indigenous people who were already living here?
Right. It makes you wonder what it must have been like for those indigenous people to encounter these Viking explorers.
Oh, I know, right? It's like we always hear about the discovery of America from the European perspective.
Yeah,
But what about the people who are already here?
exactly. What was it like for them?
Yeah. Imagine seeing these tall, bearded warriors with their strange ships and customs.
It must have been mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And to think this was all happening centuries before Columbus,
I know.
it really challenges everything we thought we knew.
It does. The story of Vikings in North America is a reminder that history is full of surprises
It really is.
and that there's always more to learn.
I'm definitely hooked.
Yeah.
This is way more fascinating than what I learned at school.
Yeah.
So what else can you tell me about this Viking settlement at Lanso Meadows? Was it like a big, thriving community or just a small little outpost?
So, based on the evidence, it seems like it was more of a temporary base camp for exploration
Okay.
rather than a permanent settlement.
Gotcha. But they were definitely exploring, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What's really intriguing is they found artifacts at Lanso Meadows that came from further south,
Really?
suggesting that these Vikings ventured beyond Newfoundland.
Wow. So the mystery continues.
It does.
This is getting more and more intriguing. Okay, but before we get carried away with visions of Vikings roaming all over North America,
Right.
you got to talk about those runestone hoaxes.
Oh, yes.
The claims that Vikings made it all the way to Minnesota and other places?
Yeah.
What's the deal with those?
Okay, so the runestones.
Yeah.
They're a great example of how history gets mixed with myth and wishful thinking. So in the 19th century, as America was building its national identity,
All right.
there was this surge of interest in pre-Columbian history.
Right.
And the idea of Vikings being here first was really appealing to people.
Yeah, I can see that.
So people were finding these runestones,
Okay.
claiming they were proof of Vikings all over America.
But were they all fake?
Most of them, yeah.
Really?
The most famous one, the Kensington Runestone,
Okay.
found in Minnesota,
Right.
has been totally debunked by experts.
Wow.
It seems a lot of these discoveries were fueled by this desire to connect with the past,
Yeah.
and sometimes to push a certain narrative about who had the rightful claim to the land.
Right. It's amazing how these historical narratives can be so powerful and so easily manipulated.
It really is. It reminds us to always be critical of what we read and hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to history.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've debunked the runestone myths.
We have.
But the fact remains, Vikings were in North America centuries before Columbus, which is crazy when you think about it. So if Lanso Meadows was just a base camp,
Mm-hmm.
how far south did they actually go?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive into that,
Okay.
I think we need to take a closer look at those interactions between the Vikings and the indigenous people they met.
Right.
The sagas mention these encounters,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to hear what you think might have happened.
Oh,
So let's unpack that further.
sounds good. You know, it's funny. We think of Vikings going to, like, Baghdad, which is a long way away. It's almost like a historical fantasy, you know?
Yeah.
But the idea of them being in mainland North America,
Yeah,
that really captures the imagination.
it does. It really challenges how we think about the history of this
Yeah,
continent.
right.
And what's even more fascinating is Lanso Meadows might not be the only Viking site in North America.
You're right. There's been a lot of talk about other potential discoveries.
Yeah, like those Viking settlements in New England. I
Exactly.
remember seeing documentaries about that. The latest on those.
Well, the evidence is still pretty inconclusive.
Okay.
There have been some finds,
Okay.
like possible Norse artifacts
Hmm.
and some intriguing stone structures,
Yeah.
but nothing that definitively proves a Viking presence.
So we're still waiting for that smoking gun.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, but even if those New England sites turn out to be nothing,
Right.
the fact that Vikings made it to Lanso Meadows
Yeah,
opens up a whole world of possibilities.
it does.
I mean, if they had a base camp in Newfoundland,
Right.
it's logical to assume they explored further south.
It's a reasonable assumption. The big questions are,
Yeah.
how far did they go?
Right.
And what were their interactions like with the indigenous people?
Which brings us to those mysterious Skraelings
Right.
mentioned in the sagas.
Yeah.
Who were those people?
Well, the term Skraeling is kind of tricky.
Okay.
It's a general term that the Norse used for indigenous people.
Gotcha.
They met in the North Atlantic, so it doesn't tell us exactly which groups they encountered in North America.
So it's not a specific tribe or group,
Yeah.
or like a catch-all term.
Exactly.
Okay. But based on where Lands Meadows is,
Mm-hmm.
can't we like make some educated guesses about who those Skraelings might have been?
We can. Based on the location and the timing,
Okay.
it's likely they met groups like the Bealthuk in Newfoundland
Okay.
and possibly Algonquin-speaking peoples further south.
And the sagas describe both trade and conflict between the Vikings and these indigenous groups.
Yeah, it wasn't always a peaceful first encounter.
Right. Makes you wonder what those first encounters must have been like.
I know, right?
Imagine seeing these tall, bearded warriors with their weapons and their unfamiliar customs.
It must have been quite an experience.
Yeah. Pretty mind-blowing. And we can only speculate about the impact those encounters had,
Right.
both on the Vikings
Mm-hmm.
and on the indigenous populations.
Yeah. We know the Viking presence was short-lived,
Right?
but even a brief encounter can have lasting consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And beyond the immediate impact,
Yeah.
the idea of Vikings in America has had a
Yeah.
huge impact on how we view history.
Right.
It challenges those old narratives
Exactly.
about Columbus being the first European here.
Mm-hmm. It forces us to rethink everything.
Yeah, it really does. And it's not just about the past either.
No, it's not. The way we think about and portray Vikings today
Right.
has implications for how we understand ourselves in our present.
That's a great point. We talked about the appropriation of Viking imagery by white supremacist groups.
We did.
But there are other more subtle ways that the Viking narrative is being used today.
Like what?
Well, like the whole Viking heritage tourism industry.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like everyone wants a piece of that Viking mystique.
It's true. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
From TV shows and movies.
To like Viking-themed bars and restaurants.
Right. We're fascinated by their strength, their
Yeah.
independence, their connection to nature.
It seems like it.
Yeah,
But we have to be careful not to romanticize them too much.
definitely. The Vikings were also involved in slavery and raiding.
Right.
It's easy to create a sanitized version of the past
Yeah.
that ignores the less savory parts of their history.
It's like picking and choosing the parts of history that fit our own narratives.
Yeah, and ignoring the complexities and contradictions.
Exactly. So how do we navigate?
Right. How do we appreciate the Vikings and their history
Yeah.
without romanticizing them or appropriating their culture?
Right.
I think it comes down to approaching history with a critical and open mind.
Okay.
We need to acknowledge the limitations of our sources, consider multiple perspectives,
Right.
and be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
And maybe most importantly, we need to
Yeah.
think about how the stories we tell about the past
Right.
impact our present
Exactly, because those stories shape our understanding of who we are.
and where we come from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to those runestone hoaxes.
Yeah.
They weren't just harmless attempts to connect with the past.
Right. There was often a deeper motivation.
There was They were often attempts to legitimize claims to land and resources,
Right.
to assert a certain narrative of ownership and belonging.
And those narratives can have a lasting impact.
They can, even
Yeah.
if they're based on fabricated evidence.
It's amazing how those stories from the past can continue to resonate in the present.
I know. It's fascinating.
And in the case of the Vikings, it seems like there's still so many unanswered questions.
There are. And that's what makes studying history so interesting.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process of discovery and reevaluation. The past is never truly settled.
Right.
It's constantly being reinterpreted as new evidence emerges.
Yeah, and new voices are heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the case of Vikings in America,
Yeah.
it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Who knows what other discoveries are out there waiting to be unearthed?
I know. Imagine finding like definitive proof of a Viking presence further south.
Right.
Maybe the Great Lakes region or even further down the coast.
It would be amazing.
It would completely change our understanding of early American history.
It would. But even without those dramatic discoveries, the
Yeah.
story we've uncovered so far
Yeah.
is pretty mind-blowing.
It is Vikings
Yeah.
in America centuries before Columbus.
I know. It's crazy.
It's a reminder that history is full of surprises
Mhm.
and that the most well-known narratives
Yeah,
aren't always the most accurate.
exactly. And those unexpected twists and turns
Yeah,
are what make history so captivating.
it's true. You know, it's funny, we've been talking about Vikings traveling across the Atlantic,
Right.
but we haven't really talked about how they actually did it.
The logistics.
Yeah, like what kind of technology did they have back then?
Right.
I mean, this was long before GPS and modern navigational tools.
Mhm.
What did they use to find their way?
That's a great question. It speaks to the ingenuity and skill of these ancient mariners.
Let's dive into that next. So how did they do it?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we rely on GPS
Right.
and all this fancy technology today.
Okay.
But back then, they
Yeah.
had to navigate by the stars and the sun.
It seems impossible.
It does. It really speaks to their skill as seafarers
Yeah.
and their deep knowledge of the natural world. They were masters of celestial navigation,
Right.
using the stars and sun
Right.
to chart their course across vast distances.
Okay, but what about when it was cloudy?
Uh-huh.
Surely they couldn't rely on the stars all the time.
You're right. They had to be resourceful.
Okay.
So, in addition to celestial navigation,
Yeah.
they use tools like sunstones.
Sunstones. What
Yeah.
are those?
So, sunstones are these special crystals
Okay.
that can help determine the position of the sun, even on cloudy days.
Wait, so they had these crystals that could act like a backup GPS?
Yeah.
How does that even work?
Okay, so sunstones,
Yeah.
they're made of a type of feldspar
Okay.
that polarizes light.
Okay.
So, by holding up the stone
Uh-huh.
and rotating it, Vikings could find the point where the light passing through was the brightest,
Okay.
and that indicated the direction of the sun.
Even if they couldn't see it.
Exactly, even if it was hidden behind clouds.
So it's like Viking crystal technology.
Right.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it just goes to show how innovative they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they combined traditional knowledge with a willingness to experiment
Yeah.
and find new ways to solve problems.
That's amazing. And it wasn't just about technology, was it?
No.
I mean, they had to have incredible courage to sail across the ocean,
Absolutely.
knowing that they might never see land again.
But those voyages were incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
They faced storms,
Right.
treacherous currents, and the constant threat of getting lost.
It must have taken a lot of resilience
It did. It took a special kind of determination.
to undertake those journeys.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate the human spirit of exploration.
It does. That drive to push beyond the known world,
Mm-hmm.
to discover new
It's
horizons.
a powerful force. It's shaped human history
For millennia.
for millennia. And in a way,
Yeah.
the Vikings embody that spirit.
They do.
Yeah.
They weren't afraid to venture into the unknown,
To test their limits
Right.
and challenge what was possible.
and their legacy continues to inspire us today.
Right.
They become these iconic figures, symbolizing strength,
Resilience.
a thirst for adventure.
You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
In movies, TV shows,
Video games.
even fashion.
Yeah. But as we've talked about,
Yeah,
we can't romanticize them too much.
definitely. The Vikings were also involved in slavery and raiding.
Right. It's easy to create a sanitized version of the past.
One that ignores the more brutal practices.
Exactly. So we can admire their seafaring skills
Yes.
and their spirit of exploration,
Absolute.
but without condoning those other parts of their history.
It's about recognizing the complexities and understanding that even celebrated figures were products of their time.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Vikings in America, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Okay, well, I think the most important thing is to recognize that history is full of surprises.
It is.
The story of Vikings in North America.
Yeah.
It challenges the traditional narrative
About Columbus.
about Columbus being the discoverer of America.
Right. It reminds us that there's always more to the story.
Exactly. More perspectives to consider.
And more layers to uncover.
Always more to learn. It's a good reminder to never stop questioning.
Yeah.
Never stop exploring.
Never stop digging deeper.
Exactly. Keep diving into history.
Well said. On that note, I want to thank you for taking us on this journey.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
It's been eye-opening.
It has.
And I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot.
I hope so. Remember, history is not just about dates and facts.
Right.
It's about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we came from.
Well said. So keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
And keep those imaginations firing.
Exactly.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic.
We will.
Ready to uncover more hidden truths and challenge those conventional narratives.
Until next time.
Until next time.